Hello one and all, and welcome to another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. Today it doesn't look like we have a ton of different headlines to cover, but we definitely have some interesting ones to cover, and I wanted to start with this scene of Chinese robotics and kind of what it looks like over there versus, well, we've seen what we have here, and it's definitely not this. I haven't seen any Dr. Octopus type things or any of the facial features or anything like that. Obviously, there's a lot of good that this could be used for, and there's a lot of weird or maybe bad that this could also be used for. So this is going to be a mixed topic, but it's interesting to see where this stuff is when we're on the cutting edge. You know, some of the facial features, some of the eye movements and things like that I maybe could have done without, but I think we're in that uncanny valley, and we're starting to see what the capabilities of modern robotics is really going to be, especially when we start to combine it with AI. And if we start looking at this kind of stuff as a baseline, we kind of ask ourselves, where does it go from here? How much better does it get? Moving into a topic that's obviously very loaded, very difficult to deal with, and obviously very different. We're now dealing with a lot of emotional demands in a lot of different states dealing with this specific type of imagery. And as time goes on, I could see this becoming a huge issue as it gets conflated with the anti-AI hate that's already out there. You know, a lot of the anti-AI people are counting on an existential threat, something that they can't really prove is going to happen, whereas this is something that is not necessarily existential. This is potentially happening in the here and now. You know, creating links to real crimes and real things that are taking place is the quickest way to get AI regulated. This is the quickest way to get laws put into place and the quickest way to get this out of the hands of people. Now, if this is doing more damage to people than things like guns or things like drugs, then, you know, maybe it's a good idea. But this topic here becomes such a loaded issue that taking a position that's anywhere near the contrary is going to make you look like you are on the wrong side of history. So just to be clear, I want to say that this type of imagery is not okay, but I do believe it's going to be one of those issues that's exploded into something much larger, politicized, and pulled into future arguments for anti-AI regulation. I just don't believe that a lot of people who would be making this argument are doing it to protect kids or doing it in good faith. You know, but I imagine it would be made very clear by looking at their voting records for things like guns. But yeah, I just wanted to point out and make note of the fact that this became a nationwide issue all of a sudden, despite there's no actual use cases or anything of that sort. There wasn't any event that caused this all of a sudden. But yeah, go ahead and decide for yourself, leave a comment. I don't want to be mistaken for someone who's soapboxing for making this type of imagery. That's not my intent at all. I just don't want more regulation than already exists, and I think this very quickly could become a snowball effect. But moving into a weird update that I came across, and I didn't expect this, but the Grammys is going to consider that AI Drake and Weeknd song. Now, a lot of people have looked at various different law cases and things like that to set precedent on the future of AI and how copyright is going to be utilized, but take a look at this. This is something that AI was used as a tool. Not exactly the same as auto-tune or sampling tracks, but let's be honest, those are other methods of doing something somewhat similar within this industry. UMG, Universal Music Group, who I've talked about a couple of times on the channel, they filed a copyright claim, despite the fact that they don't actually own the rights to any of that creation, right? And they got that all taken down. Now, that could probably be challenged, but that's not the point of this rant. The long and short of it is Harvey Mason Jr., the CEO of the Academy, is saying as far as the creative side, it absolutely is eligible because it was written by a human. The article finishes here by basically saying there's a roadblock that they have to have some kind of general distribution, and because of the DMCA takedowns and things like that, they may not be able to actually satisfy that requirement. But it is interesting to see that otherwise they would have something that could qualify. Moving into another update in entertainment, I don't have a lot of news for you. Unfortunately, the writer's strike is not over. In fact, it might be getting a little bit bigger. There are now rumblings that there is an authorization for video game companies to be brought into the fold, and these aren't small companies. Considering that the video game industry is actually bigger than the movie industry nowadays, this is potentially huge news. The Writers Guild SAG-AFTRA has current contracts with Activision, EA, Insomniac, Epic, WB, huge, the biggest game companies that are out there. Now, the Writers Guild in this instance is basically making a demand for an 11% increase across the board. The reason why I'm bringing this up, the reason why I'm talking about it is right here. Once again, artificial intelligence is putting our members in jeopardy of reducing their opportunity to work. This has not happened. Unfortunately, the video game industry, especially the corporate video game industry, is a terrible industry to work in as a worker, as a developer, as an artist. Now, just to be clear, I do want them all to get paid a lot more. I want them to have that job security. I want them to not have to do that. That would be amazing. Certainly, take that money from the people at the top who are doing very little to actually earn it and give it to the people who rightfully deserve it. I'm all for that. But I just can't get behind the claim that artificial intelligence is causing these issues. It's not. It never has. The real issue is that it's just very, very greedy people, and unfortunately Americans are really not wired well to deal with. How do we stop that from happening? Now, the good news that I have for you here is that the video game companies, especially the ones that I mentioned, they haven't put any games on hold or anything like that. In fact, the quote here shows that they're negotiating in good faith to probably try to get closer to whatever the demands here are. So the good news about the way this reads is it could become a non-issue, and we can focus back on the entertainment industry where the real issues are taking place. These streaming services are just simply not paying people. They're hoarding all of the money for themselves. And it gets worse the lower and lower you go down on the rungs of the corporate ladder. But it almost stings extra hard seeing the characters and the actors that we love and knowing that they aren't receiving the benefits that they actually work for. Switching gears to Elon Musk and x.ai, which is Twitter and not Twitter at the same time. It's the future of Twitter, I guess, when it becomes the everything app. Anyway, quick note to say, and this is really just confirming what I've been saying all along, is Twitter's going to be using and has been using anything that's not private, not a direct message, and they're going to be using that to train x.ai, the LLM, also known as TruthGPT or whatever you want to call it. Who knows if and when it'll happen, who knows what it'll be called, but that is the latest update here. They made official changes to their privacy policy using the wording of, "We may use the information we collect and publicly available information to help train our machine learning or artificial intelligence models for the purposes outlined in this policy." And while X as a company is separated itself a little bit from these AI ambitions, Elon Musk himself is using the ownership of the X company to use the data for his own ambitions, according to the article here. If you're a member of the press and you have a question for Twitter, you get a poop emoji if you ask them any questions nowadays. So there's going to be very little actual information coming out. So there's actually some suspicions that some of this data could be used for other things. For example, Elon Musk has talked about a version of LinkedIn that he wants to incorporate into X Twitter. And then, of course, with all of the stories of how the company has lost money hand over fist, and I won't even go into the accusations that he's throwing around, there's also the idea that he could just simply sell the data. You know, maybe other companies would pay more for this data than he could make with advertisers otherwise. But everything here points to the reality that you aren't the executive owner of the information that you put onto a platform. You are a co-owner, so to speak, and they have the ability to do with that information what they want. You can imagine, for example, with Instagram and all of the pictures that they have at their disposal, they could train a Stable Diffusion-like model of their own that would probably surpass just about anyone else. Meta would probably even release the dang thing open source, just given how they've been doing that from model to model. So a platform doing this directly with your data, that's kind of new precedent. And when we live in a world where we've got authors suing OpenAI over potential copyright of learned data and things of that nature, you can imagine that something like this is going to set new precedent and new territory in the law as well. Moving forward with a bit of good news here, at least I feel like it's good news. Google is at least requiring political ads prominently disclose that they have AI-generated aspects if and when they do. And that way we're not going to see, hopefully, a number of deepfakes. I'm sure some people are going to find ways to potentially circumvent the rules. You know, for most of these goons, it seems like politics is a game of doing just that, is finding ways to toe the line. But making this a rule in the world of ad space, especially when false advertising is a crime, is probably a great idea. Now, for those of you who've been paying close attention, AI-generated ads have already infiltrated all of the ad space in the world. They're in Google Ads, they're in Twitter ads, they're in Facebook advertisements. And it definitely seems like some of the moderation tools maybe that were out there probably weren't ready for this world just yet. And things like this world where advertising needs a little bit of oversight, this is where I can rest assured that AI is not going to just take all the jobs, because we do still need to make sure that things are happening on the up and up. These systems aren't ready to run unmanaged just yet. Maybe one day. But I will say, especially with an upcoming presidential election, and we've seen what you might call some potentially shady or unethical practices utilizing some AI stuff already, this seems like a great regulation to put in place. I will say that this is one of those things where the consequences certainly need to be big enough to hurt the organization. If this is just a matter of a fine, for example, a political organization may not necessarily care about that, or a company that's large enough to just post anyway. It's not necessarily ethical, but unfortunately it can be the reality sometimes. And the last story I want to talk about today is a very promising looking 3D model. The team behind this looks like they're a combination from ByteDance, which is behind TikTok, and the University of California, San Diego. But this is called MV Dream. And the results here, as you can see, look really promising. Now, I will tell you that this is a technology that I'm really looking forward to seeing getting off the ground. I don't know what the geometry is going to look like afterward. It's probably a mess to use in something like a video game. But I'm sure a lot of 3D artists would even agree that having something like this to base your topography off of would be a good idea, or a potential boost in your workflow at the very least. What I think people should be looking at in terms of something like this, or even with just regular two-dimensional AI art, is something like a time saver. It's not meant to be the final product, and it's not supposed to be just prompt and you're done. Maybe in some cases where you need a piece of clip art or something goofy, but not if you're designing a video game or something where you need a 3D model, for example. Now, when you take a look at their GitHub site, some of these are even more impressive, and you can see the back and forth when they're fully textured. I don't know if the process is automatically adding the texture and the color and all that. It potentially could. But as far as I've seen, there's no way to just download it and test it out. I haven't seen this on Hugging Face, for example, or anything of that nature. These could be extremely curated examples of what could otherwise be a terrible model. Who knows? But even if you got results like this 1 out of every 100 times, it's still something worth checking out, something worth looking into, in my opinion. And again, just like what we talked about with the robots, it's a technology that we're only going to see get better from here, so it's exciting to see every step of the journey. In this final piece of imagery here, you can see where their model compares here on the far right to everything else that's out there. Honestly, this is the one that caught my eye the most, this prolific dreamer, and what looks almost like a papercraft version of everything. I don't know, for some reason that looks really cool to me. But their version obviously stands out. First off, just a lot less errors. Some of these are obviously extremely cursed. Some of them stand out for great reasons and have a very stylized look to them. But theirs are the most realistic, something like you'd find in a modern video game, or maybe not so modern, but a video game, nonetheless. Now, the MV Dream model was released in a way as a paper, not necessarily as something downloadable, something that you could use on your own yet. But hopefully, because it has been released like this, we can see other technology adopt it up very quickly. We might see a service with the compute pick it up and run with it. We might see somebody release a tool to make use out of it. Who knows? But if you're as interested as I am in that and following along, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you're hitting that notification bell. I always appreciate those of you who make it to the end of these videos, and I especially appreciate those of you who pop in every week and leave a comment for me. That really does mean a lot. I'll leave you on that note to enjoy the rest of your weekend, but as always, thank you for watching.